Here we go. All right. Well, Kufar Akbar, everybody, welcome to another edition of the Cross and the Crescent discussion group. This is a weekly blog talk radio and YouTube live stream show that discusses the differences between Islam and Christianity. We are here for about 2 hours every Sunday. Last week, I think we cut it down to about an hour and a half, I think. And we were talking the difference between crucifixion and crucifixion, where it's fictitious. And I think we did a pretty good job of nailing it to demonstrate that the crucifixion of Jesus Christ is the most demonstrable event from antiquity. And to deny that is to deny history and facts and the historical method altogether. Welcome, everybody. I see that people are starting to step into the chat and saying hello. We got a Cross-Examining Scriptures is with us again today. Dragon's with us all the way from Europe. And Little Deer showed up early, and Repent just popped in. So thank you all for coming. All right, so a couple house cleaning things here. I've been in contact with a gentleman that goes to Spiegel's Corner and works collaboratively with Hatun Tosh, and he has his own channel, Soko Films. Bob the Builder. I'm not sure how many of y'all watch his videos, but he puts up some pretty incredible stuff. Does quite a bit of great work down there at Speaker's Corner. And it looks like he is going to be coming to this channel, not on a Sunday, because that's the week that he goes down to Speaker's Corner. But it's going to be on, I think it's March 13th or 16th we agreed upon. And I'm going to be going to his channel the week before. And I'm thinking that when I go to his channel, today's content, what we're going to discuss today, is exactly what I'm going to discuss on his channel on that day. So I'm looking forward to that, and see if maybe we can get some more peeps to come in and join us on our Sunday rants and raves. Has anybody got anything that they need? Isa, what are you doing? What is this thing you got? What is on your face here? What is this? Isa, are you there?
I'm here. What's up?
I don't know. What is this picture? This new picture that you got going here? What is
it was
this?
Just a picture on my phone when I logged in. I don't know. Somehow I had this avatar. So
looks like you're waiting patiently in the dentist chair.
That's what I was actually doing. Some kind of patient care type of thing. That's why I was wearing that outfit.
Oh, okay. Well,
so it's actually accurate.
Well, you were playing the part well.
I was doing some jobs at the time. So yes.
What was that, Ed?
I was going to say, Dr. Kabir.
Oh, you're sweet. Thank you.
He's getting operated on. All right, let me go ahead and share the right screen here. Okay, so today's topic is going to be about Ptolemy. Who? Ptolemy. Ptolemy is I think he's a 1st century, 2nd century guy from Alexandria, Egypt. And
Wait,
he
isn't it Ptolemy?
No, Ptolemy. This
No.
P is silent.
What are they the P there? If it sounds
look, dude, I didn't write the name. I didn't name the guy.
The Latin. I think it's Latin. It's just, that's the way it is.
All right.
All right. If you want me to say Ptolemy, I can do it. But there's some names here today that you're going to laugh at me because I am Agatharchides. What? Who would name their kid Agatharchides? I mean, could you imagine going to kindergarten? What's your name? Agatharchides.
Try and say that 3 times fast.
Who does that? Who does those types of things? Okay, so let's go ahead and get into this. Today's show is going to be kind of a combination of a show that I've done before when I talk about how do we know a faith system is true, or what would lend credibility to a faith system, along with demonstrating the historicity of any event or civilizations. So let me go ahead and start with this here. Let's get this up on the screen. Whoopsie. Did I do that right? No, I'm doing this one. There we go. That's the one I wanted. There we go. Okay, so the false history of Islam's most important city. We're going to be talking about Ptolemy and Mecca, and I know we've been over Mecca 100,000 times, but I wanted to keep on pointing these things out because there's always people that have been sending me. Actually, there's people who have been sending me emails after we do shows on Mecca, saying, "Well, you don't know what you're talking about. Ptolemy mentioned Mecca." All right. Well, let's see. No, why he did not. Okay. So, a lot of the references that I'm using for today. Jay Smith. He offers a graduate level class at a university out in California, Veritas University, and I've taken his class. This is the second time I've taken this class, this Origins class 504 with him. Some of the material comes from there. Of course, Dan Gibson and his work over at nabatea.net and his on-the-ground research that he's done there in the Middle East. But the main body of what's going to be coming is from this Dr. Rafat Amari and from his book, Islam in Light of History. And some of this information is going to be absolutely fabuloso, trust me. All right, so when we look at the historicity of Islam, you have to look at where did all of these events occur? And if you can't show me or you cannot demonstrate that this place existed at the time that you're saying that these events occurred, you don't have an argument for the historicity of your religion. And meaning that somebody has taken your belief system and redacted it back onto a place that didn't exist. And they didn't know it didn't exist at that time when we start looking at a lot of these places. Because when we look at these other civilizations, these other great civilizations that existed in the world, you look at Rome. I mean, look at Rome. For crying out loud, Rome, you have the Colosseum. This is a testament to who was it? The emperor, I don't know if it was Vespasian, that brought the Jews out of Israel in 70 AD after they conquered it and had them come in and build the Colosseum. Well, we still have the Colosseum. I've been to the Colosseum several times, and you can go in there and actually see the archaeology behind this. You can look in a lot of other digs where they have the tile to floors that still exist, the walls that still exist from the 1st century. And all across the countryside, you have these mini colosseums and amphitheaters that they had set up all throughout the Roman Empire. So when we start talking about in the Roman Empire, they had all of these amphitheaters that they would put on plays, but they would also spread the news of the empire, what the empire was doing. Well, we can go back and look in archaeology and see that they existed. Same thing with Egypt. For crying out loud, you have these pyramids that are, 3,000, 4,000 years old, still standing there. And throughout the entire region, you have the remnants of other building sites. This one is in Avaris, where if you go to, what's that guy's name? Let's see. I got it right here. This is who's who's the guy that made the Tim Mahoney? There we go. Tim Mahoney, and his work on the Red Sea crossing, the Moses controversy, all those things, the Exodus. This is one of the places that you can go and find Semitic remnants there in Egypt, and that all happens here in. Here's Avaris up here. That's where they find these things. Greek history is all over the place. As a matter of fact, in Greece, when Greece hosted the Olympics in 2000, they found so many. Look at all these artifacts that they found. They ran out of places to put these things in museums, and you just don't want to throw them away. So what they did was when they were redoing the subway system, they built displays all throughout the subway systems to display all of these artifacts that they continued to find 2,400 years after the fact. China's the same thing. You have all kinds of archaeological history and digs that we find in China itself, attesting to the antiquity of their civilization. Even here in South America, in the Peruvian village of Machu Picchu, you have all kinds of evidence there in the Andes Mountains, the steepest mountain systems in the world. Oh, by the way, they had the Inca Empire had this extensive road system that was beyond belief. And you still have people going down there doing archaeological digs, doing the work, demonstrating and discovering new things about that civilization that existed at that time. You go clear back to the Babylonian time period. This is 2,500 years ago, at the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Here you have a relief of this. I took this picture when I was in Iraq, as a matter of fact. This is just this is in Babylon, the ancient city of Babylon. Yeah, there I am. And then you had this old statue that's there. You look here in the back. This back here, where is it at? Where are we at? Come on back here. Come back. Why am I not being able to get this over here? What is going on?
That's the problem I have sometimes with my mouse. It doesn't go where I want.
There we go. Okay, there it is. All right back here. Can you guys see that where that red dot is? Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, that's one of Saddam's castles outside the ancient city of Babylon. He was reconstructing the ancient city, and we were there. And this little girl right here, she was selling pamphlets about the city of Babylon, and she was trying to sell me one that was in German. And she doesn't read and she doesn't know. And I think she was selling them for $1. She's like, give me $1 and I'll, and that's the only English she knew, $1. And I gave her, I think, a 20. And and you could tell that, she was out there for her family. She didn't have anything. I just gave her 20 and I said, here, take this. And she wouldn't take it. She goes, no, $1. And I said, no, here, you take this. And the dad, who was standing out, because we had if you can see here, we had a whole bunch of soldiers back there. He's standing out off to the side, and she looks at him, and he comes walking over, and he sees what it was, and he says, oh, yeah, no, thank you. We appreciate that. But this is the head of a lion, and some guy's not having a good day, evidently. But this is from the Babylonian Empire. And then there in Nineveh, here you have these winged dragons with the face of men on them. And this is from Sargon II, who carried away the southern kingdom of Israel. And this is the father of Sennacherib. I got to go there again. I got to see that. And this is Sennacherib's castle that they're excavating there. So here you have biblical evidence in a different country outside of Israel demonstrating the veracity of the Bible. So why is this important? Why is this so important? Well, number one, there is no evidence outside of Islamic sources for the existence of Mecca in the 7th century anywhere. No evidence whatsoever. There's no archaeological evidence for it. There's no manuscript evidence for it. There's no geographical evidence for it. And there's no cartographical evidence. So what do I mean by cartographical evidence? I mean, there's no maps putting Mecca or having Mecca being in existence in the 7th century. So you don't have archaeology like you do the rest of the great civilizations. You don't have manuscript evidence outside of Islamic sources. Now, keep in mind, I'm saying outside of Islamic sources, and Islamic sources include the ahadith that were written down 200 and compiled 250 years after the death of Muhammad.
That's the point I was just going to ask. Can you explain the significance when you're saying the 7th century over and over again? Why are you saying that?
Yeah, okay, that's a great point. Let me all right. So when we look at the 7th century, this is what supposedly when Muhammad lived. 632 AD is his death. He was born in 570 and begins receiving his revelations around 610 and makes Hajj in or Hijra, not Hajj, Hijra. I think that's 623, dies 632. That's the 7th century. So at the death of Muhammad, this is when Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, the four rightly guided caliphs, supposedly lived and spread Islam all throughout the Middle East and into Christendom, conquering 2/3 of Christendom within 100 years. Now, all of this is semi accurate information. However, it's based on a story coming out of Mecca. All of this originates in Mecca. Mecca does not have any evidence demonstrating that it existed in the 7th century. And this is what we're going to go through today. So it's important to understand that when you talk about something that was written down, compiled in 870, this is Sahih al-Bukhari, the first one to start compiling these hadith literature. That's 250 years after the death of Muhammad. That's the 9th century. And we're supposed to believe it.
And that's that fantasy land stuff. That man makes up so much crap.
And you don't have any complete manuscripts before 1924. That's a real problem.
Complete manuscripts of what?
Of the Quran.
That's something we'll have to discuss later. What do you mean complete manuscript?
A total, full, complete manuscript of the Quran before 1924. It doesn't exist.
They have partial.
Al-Fadi is actually doing his thesis on this. So keep an eye on Al-Fadi.
Al-Fadi, but I've heard that from Jay Smith too.
Yep.
Say that again, Sharon. I didn't hear that part.
Oh, I've heard that research from Jay Smith too. They have not found any complete Qurans. The Qurans they did find had overwrites, erasures.
Right. Okay. Palimpsests.
Nothing matched.
Right.
There's no
20th century.
Yeah, they have pieces. They have fragments. They do not have a complete Quran.
Yeah, they don't have a complete 114 chapters of the Quran. And to make matters worse, they have some Qurans in other parts of the world that have 116 chapters, and there's another one that has 113 chapters in it. So, yeah.
Perfectly preserved. Liars, haters, Islamophobes. Quit saying that. All right. I can't unblock. All right. Let's go back to why this is important. All right. And the reason why this is important because Mecca, according to the Quran, is the place where Adam and Eve were cast down to. Don't you know Adam and Eve, they were created in heaven, and then once they sinned, then they were cast down to earth. Mecca is the place where Abraham and Ishmael built the Kaaba. So at a minimum here, we need to understand this, at a minimum, Mecca is a 4,000-year-old city. At a minimum. And if we're talking about the Kaaba that exists today, that was built by Ishmael and Abraham, there must be some sort of evidence for its existence dating back 4,000 years. I'm not asking 1,600 years back to the 7th century. I'm going to ask, okay, where's the evidence for it from 4,000 BC or 2,000 BC to the present day? Where is that? And you're going to be astounded what we find. It's supposed to be the mother of all cities. It's supposed to have all the previous pagan religions practiced there. This is, of course, important because Muhammad began his ministries there. Hundreds of prophets are supposedly buried there. And if you know anything about Islamic law, the Sharia, and how burials are supposed to occur, once a Muslim is killed or dies, they're to be buried they're to be buried within 24 hours. So if you die in Medina, there's no way that you're going to get buried in Mecca within 24 hours at this time, because they didn't have helicopters or you couldn't do it at that time.
They had the wing Barack. Come on, dude. Come on.
Oh, I forgot. Great point, Rad.
They
Thank
invented
you.
air travel.
There we go. The first Air Force. My goodness. How did I forget that? You have 1.6 billion people bowing towards this location 5 times a day. And I would say that not all Muslims do this 5 times a day, but I would say a good portion of them do. And this is the place that every Muslim is required to visit at least once in their lifetime if they're physically and financially able.
Oh, I did the math on this, by the way.
Uh-oh.
And do you know with their current with the people that they have in Islam and how many people they can actually fit in the Kaaba and once a year for the Hajj, it would take them 500 years to get all the Muslims in there with their current population.
In the Kaaba. Yeah, it's not that big of a place. As a matter of fact, I think I have a couple pictures of it in the slideshow showing how small it actually it really is.
It's basically an indoor shopping mall now. I'm surprised they don't put in a water. I'm surprised they don't put in a water park and roller coaster rides, dude. That's probably next.
Okay, well, we don't put a water park there because they get 4 inches of rain a year. That's probably
well, they can pump it in.
Okay, good point. All right, so when we look at the evidence for Mecca prior to the 7th century, it can be summed up in this: nothing. There is nothing there. There is no evidence for Mecca in the 7th century. So what must...
Wait, that looks like Muhammad in a snowstorm.
How's that?
Muhammad's an ultra white guy.
I was gonna say he's a white dude in the white snow. Okay, I get it.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to turn this into some type of racial.
It's not racial.
That's a David Wood. That's a David Wood joke. It's a David Wood joke.
Yeah, I remember hearing that.
Sorry, I'll be quiet now. Go ahead. Sorry, teacher.
Okay,
I'm a disruptive student. Sorry.
Yeah. All right. So when we look at the evidence for Mecca, you're going to want to look for archaeological evidence. Meaning, when you start digging around the city, you would find things that would be discovered from past civilizations, from past centuries. They haven't found it. The oldest thing that they've found is something from a 12th century Ottoman fort. That's the oldest archaeological evidence that they've discovered in Mecca. 12th century. 12th century. 12th century, guys. That's 500 years after the life of Muhammad before they find anything indicating that anybody lived in that area. Cartographical, that means maps. It's not on any maps except Ptolemy's map, which we're going to learn that no, it's not there either. Geographically, as you describe Mecca in the Quran, in Hadith literature, that's not the place. Why? Because it says that there's olive trees there. It says that there's grass there. They say there's tillable soil. It says, and even when they go to the Bible and say in the Valley of Becca, well, in that same verse, it talks about there being springs and pools of water. And if you look in Mecca, there are no springs and no pools of water unless you have one of these annual torrential rainstorms. If you're going to say, well, there it is, I think you'd be pretty weak to do that. And there's no manuscript evidence. There's nobody mentions Mecca, and we're going to go through all of this today. And if you go to Islamic Awareness is probably the biggest apologetic site for Islam today. And if you go to their website, they cite Claudius Ptolemy, and they say that he was not a descriptive geographer, and his book was intended to be no more than a commentary on his maps. He enumerated some 114 cities and villages in Arabia Felix, which is the region that we're talking about, that includes Medina and Mecca. And then he goes on to say, here you have temples. He mentioned a temple. And then down here, La Thripa is supposed to be Medina. So since he lists Medina, then therefore he must also be referring to Mecca. in his other allusions there. So where do they have this? Well, let's first off take a look and see who Claudius Ptolemy was. He's a Greek. He's a cartographer. He's a mathematician. He's actually the librarian for the Alexandrian library that, oh, by the way, was burned down by Umar in 638 AD. He was the head of that library from 127 to 150. And he had access, by being the head of that library, he's going to have access to all of the previous works prior to the 2nd century from people from Philagros, Agoras, Basiles, Delian, and all of these other geographers, cartographers, explorers prior to that. And he was one that he didn't invent the meridian mapping that we see like on globes where you have longitude and latitude, but he did perfect it. He did expound on it and made it better. And in his guide, his book, A Guide to Geography, he describes Arabia with a temple. So since there's a temple in Arabia, this has to be Mecca, right? No. And when he mentions Macoraba, Muslims today are claiming that that is supposed to be Mecca. Here's the problem. Here is a map developed based on Ptolemy's coordinates and his understanding of Arabia. This is important. Watch this. Right here is Macoraba. Can you all see that? That is Macoraba. Now, let me show you where Medina is. There's Medina. Now, this next slide is going to show you where Mecca sits. You see the problem. Macoraba, the city that is supposed to be Mecca, sits east of Medina, according to the coordinates provided by Ptolemy, instead of west, where Mecca sits. This is a huge problem. How can you say Macoraba is Mecca when, number one, it's not even close when you start. Dr. Patricia Corona, who was a linguist, and she's the one that is gone through this. She said Macoraba is nothing like Mecca as far as the pronunciation. The etymology is not even close, and it's not it. There's another city that was used. I have it listed here later on. That's closer. That has nothing to do with Mecca. So let's look at some facts about Mecca. Number one, this city, Macoraba, is not mentioned prior to the 2nd century anywhere. So if Mecca is supposed to be, folks, if Mecca is supposed to be 4,000 years old, why doesn't anybody mention it prior to the 2nd century? If Ptolemy is truly mentioned, this is truly saying this is Mecca, why isn't it mentioned prior to the 2nd century?
And why aren't they taunting their artifacts like Israel does?
Because there are none. It doesn't get any plainer than that. I mean, if you don't have any, you know, Ed, you know good and well that if there were artifacts supporting the 7th century Mecca, that they would be out there. You know for a fact that they would.
Yes, absolutely would be.
Okay, here's that city, Macoraba. And this is closer to Medina that is mentioned. So this is a city that's closer to Medina that you would think that would be closer in pronunciation to Mecca, but it's not. Macoraba, like I said, is east of Medina. Mecca is west. And Ptolemy describes it as the 5th of 6 cities to the south of Medina. So some people have gone in and actually plotted that because Ptolemy's, they've gone in and plotted it because they start naming these cities, and 4 of them in Mecca, or the Macoraba being 5th, 4 of them are just north of Yemen, which would mean that Macoraba would even be closer to Yemen. And then Pliny mentions a Macoraba, which is actually that's Pliny the Elder, by the way, which is actually in Amman. But here's the kicker. After it is mentioned here in the 2nd century by Ptolemy, it's never mentioned again. Nobody mentions this city again as Macoraba. Nobody. And then when we look at all previous surveys, none of them mention Mecca earlier. And that is what we're going to focus in on today. Now, when we look at, of course, biblical history, nobody doubts the location of Jerusalem. Back to the 11th century BC, no one doubts the writings of the Jewish scribes describing land features. Nobody doubts the 15th century return to the land of the Hebrews. No one doubts the geography as presented in the Gospel of Luke, especially if you go into the 10th chapter. This is really cool about Luke. Luke is just this astounding historian. He describes, if you remember the story of the Good Samaritan, and you have a guy that is beaten and stripped naked alongside the road and robbed. And he talks about how they went down to Jericho from Jerusalem. And if you look at the geography, Jerusalem sits up on a plateau and Jericho's down by the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is the lowest part on the planet. So even just something as an illusion, just in passing, you're still getting accurate geography being presented. Whereas in the Quran, you don't get that. And in Mecca, well, you don't get anything. So let's look at some of the other geographers and cartographers say about Mecca. And here's the question I ask, or how does every single geographer, how does every single cartographer for 600 years, for 6 centuries, miss this one city, Mecca? If it is supposed to be a city from antiquity, eons past, 4,000 years old, how can everybody miss it? And then your only excuse is well, Ptolemy says Macoraba. It's not even in the right place.
Well, I think there's another element here that people might miss is that in geography and cartography, or if you were a Roman or a Greek and you were trying to conquer a land, you have to know the land before you go and conquer it.
Exactly,
because you lose.
Talk about that, right? You're absolutely right, Paul. You have to understand, and this is where I'm getting into Alexander the Great here, and you're going to see exactly what you're talking about. How all of these guys are. It's absolutely crucial that they provide accurate descriptions of the land that they are going into and going through, not only for military conquest, but supply lines, future trade. So you're talking money. Okay, I'm getting to all this. Okay,
sorry.
no, we're getting to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so Alexander. Let's start with Alexander the Great. This is 4th century BC. He sanctions a guy by the name of Hiram. And he has this guy, Hiram, to explore the entire coastline of Arabia. This includes, yes, the Red Sea, and notes that there are no inhabitants, cities, or harbors to give anchorage for his fleet along that region where Jeddah sits today. There's no place to do this along there. And this corroborates the later Greek writings that the state is, what's the word here? Uninhabitable. He says the place is uninhabitable. Why is it uninhabitable? Because they don't have any water. If you don't have any water, you don't have any grass. If you don't have any grass, you don't have any animals. You don't have any animals, you don't have a civilization. You don't have a civilization, you don't have a Kaaba. You don't have a Kaaba, you don't have a religion. It's that simple. It is uninhabitable land, according to Hiram from the 4th century BC. Then you have a I looked this up. Theophrastus. There we go. His survey. And he wrote again in the 4th century BC. And he wrote about the Sabians, which are further north, and wrote about their trade, their land, their marine routes that they traveled. And he wrote all kinds of details about that entire region further south along the Red Sea. And guess what? Never once does he mention a Mecca. And so this demonstrates that Mecca, if the Sabians are trading, Mecca is not part of that trade. So if Mecca is supposed to be the mother of all cities, where it was built upon trade, why isn't it mentioned? Why doesn't anybody say anything about it? Gee whiz, if it's supposed to be there for 4,000 years, and that's would have been, 1,600 years up to this point, somebody would have known about it. No, nobody knows about it. And this is a writer who specializes in details These guys specialize in the details that they write down. When they start recording history and they start recording locations, geographical points, starts talking about cities, tribes, people groups, civilizations, cultures, they have to be accurate.
Eric, you have an important question and comment. I don't know if you've seen that. As someone's asking if you can use your information and translate it into Spanish.
Yeah, absolutely. Shoot me an email, Eric Theckefer. Let me type it in here. Shoot me an email and I'll send it to you, Eric.
It says it right on his name, Eric the Caffer.
Caffer, right. I pronounce it Theckefer, just to anger people. You want to call me a Caffer? There you go. There's your Caffer. I always told you about that blog talk radio show I used to go to, Muhammad Hartrue Smith. And you probably don't, nobody ever heard of the guy. But anyway, he was, I call into his show quite a bit. And he had a partner who was, Muhammad he was relatively a congenial guy. He really was. But he had a partner there that was just as rude as the day is long. He's like this Islamic supremacist, called me a kafir every time I turned around. I'm like, all right, you want to call me a kafir? That's my new name. How do you like that? He didn't appreciate that.
It's kind of interesting though, like what you're talking about, like development of timelines and stuff. Like even if we think about Arabic is a language that developed too. It's not like a language that we've seen throughout time. I think this is something that's interesting, that I don't know if you get into like fandoms and movies and stuff, but there are certain things, there's this concept called a retcon. And what people do is they do a retro continuity where they go and whatever the story was before, they kind of basically change the whole entire story to fit whatever the story is of the sequel of whatever the story that's being told, like in a movie. So
it's like they're doing with today's comic book. Yeah,
exactly. So it seems like there's a certain kind of element that we can see with this. Like people are like, well, Arabic existed from the beginning of time, but I'm like, we can see when Arabic developed. And I think it's weird that people place their faith in these types of things. I don't think that that's a healthy thing to do and say, oh, well, this place has been always existing and this language has always been existing. I'm like, yeah, I don't really think that helps your case, because we can do historical analysis and kind of prove that that's not true. So I don't know. I don't think you should put your eggs in that basket. That's all I would say.
Well, you said that's exactly what they're doing, though. That's exactly what they're doing. And it's an obvious redaction and imposition of a 7th century Mecca in their literature. It's imposing it back onto that time period, and the physical evidence is not in their favor. It's not backed up. This is why there's still people that are coming out now that are saying, well, they don't even think Muhammad lived, because that Muhammad is a title.
It is a title. It's an honorary title. It's not a name.
Yeah. So all these things are coming out. This couldn't have come out 100 years ago. This is where you start having this, this proliferation of mass information, and people are actually being able to question the history of this religion, of the hadith, of the biography. They're able to go in there and start questioning it. Okay, well, where do they get this?
They can only question it because some of them move to a land like the United States or Europe where freedom of thought is actually encouraged. And if you don't have critical thinking skills, you can't actually engage in asking questions like this.
Well, this is what we talked about. I think it was last week we were talking about the Sharia and the application of it. You cannot question. And to question any verse of the Quran is considered blasphemy, and blasphemy is punishable by death. Yeah. So people keep their mouths shut and they just go along to get along. And this is the type of, bizarro world history that you get in the process. Okay. Eratosthenes survey. Eratosthenes. And if I'm butchering his name, I do apologize. But when we start looking at all these ancient surveys that came out, they do not support Mecca. This guy lives in the 3rd century. In 2nd century BC. Again, here's somebody that went out and documented the geography of the Arabian Peninsula. And this is the reason why they did this, is that they wanted to go out and dominate the spice trade from India. So they're going to be sure of the accuracy of their maps and locations, not only of potential places where they can get supplies, but also potential trading partners. And they would most definitely document every single town, hamlet, village, or whatever along the way. And they went along and they measured they went along and measured the length of the Red Sea along the west coast of Arabia there. And he provides a complete survey of all of the marine routes that go from Yemen and up to the Gold. Look at that. What a goober. Gulf.
Is that Guild or Gulf?
That's Gold. It's the Gulf.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be an F there. I'm sorry.
All right. Hey, the joy of making typos.
I know. And
I think you've got an incredibly important point here. If you are engaged in the mathematical task of measuring the length of the Red Sea, and you are engaged in the task of documenting who's controlling the spice trade and how that is, all this stuff that's going through there, don't you think that you would notice a imaginary place called Mecca if it actually existed?
Well, you would, but the problem was everybody, when I say everybody said up to the 2nd century that this place was uninhabitable. You can't live there. You can't have a civilization there. You had Bedouins out there, but they're nomadic. There's no permanent Kaaba there for to have a civilization built upon. And here you have this guy. He describes all the people and locations of that region. Why? Because it's important for establishing trade. It's important, if you're going to establish trade, is to secure that trade also. And again, here you have somebody that describes the region as uninhabitable, meaning that you cannot live there. Why can't anybody live there? Because there's no water to drink. Here's a couple more things about it. He said that no villages are described no villages are described because there were not any. That's true. No villages or cities are described in the region by previous explorers also. That's important. Previous explorers don't mention any villages. This guy doesn't mention any villages. And if there was a place of pilgrimage, if this was indeed a place of pilgrimage, he would know about it. But there isn't. This wasn't a place of pilgrimage, because if it were, somebody would have documented it. And he does not mention Mecca, even though he followed the land route. Now, this is important. This guy followed the land route that Mecca is supposed to be part of. Now, think about this. This is supposed to be a city. This is supposed to be a city that was built in 2000 BC. The Kaaba was supposed to be built in 2000 BC by Abraham and Ishmael. And this guy's not mentioning it either. So when we look at his survey, this is basically what his survey looks like. Now, again, Arabia is much different than what it actually appears, but this was the 4th century or 3rd century BC understanding. Look how short Africa is. Africa goes clear down here if you're in reality.
Look at Europe. It looks like an animal. Looks like a wolf or a dog. Doesn't it? It's got front and hind legs.
I think that's actually fairly accurate, unfortunately.
Well, I think Rad spent too much time on a psychologist's couch looking at shit.
That's true too.
But look at it. That is true, because you got the front paw here, you got the head here, front paw, back,
got a hind leg,
other leg. You got a heck of a tail coming out. Okay, that's true. Okay, and here's my favorite guy, Agatharcides. Agatharcides is probably one of the most prominent geographers of his day. He lives in the 1st and 2nd century BC in Alexandria, Egypt, and he was the most important geographer of his time. And he was very close to the royal family that lived in this 2nd century. Ptolemy, the 1st or 2nd, was ruling at that time. But he had firsthand knowledge of all the expeditions, the Greek expeditions that were going on at that time, especially, folks, right here in the Red Sea that runs right along the coast of Mecca. Now, Mecca, don't get me wrong. Don't say, you don't know your geography, Kafir. I do know my geography. I do know that Mecca does not set right along the coast, but there are no ports there along the coast, i.e. Jeddah, that would suggest that there was anything that could supply Mecca. There are no overland routes that have been discovered up to this time saying that Mecca existed. In other words, Mecca didn't exist. And when you look at his plight in life, he had all access to all the prior geographers, just the same as Ptolemy, who followed him. And he classifies people when he cites them as eyewitnesses of the lay of the land there. And when we look at the expeditions of the 7th and 8th century, they confirm a lot of locations that he wrote about. That's kind of important. When you have confirmation that much later, 900 to 1,000 years later, confirming the locations that you mentioned, yeah, that's pretty important. And so here you have measurements provided along the Red Sea and Western Arabia. He talks about the links to land, and he talks about the links to land inward or inland and along the coast. And this is important when we start talking about trade and how you trade between different nations. He talks about the Nabateans in South Jordan and how they played a major role in the trade of that day. And he lists all kinds of places right along the Red Sea to include temples, but you'd never guess what city he does not mention. That's exactly right there. He does not mention Mecca. He mentions temples, but he doesn't mention Mecca. And these temples, so if you think of the Greeks and how polytheistic they were, they had a huge interest in temples. I was going to say something about the temple. Oh, these temples that were built, the Arabians at this time were said to believe that anytime that they found a meteorite, they built a temple around it. So they thought that was some type of message from God, so they built a temple around a meteorite. And notice he lists all kinds of Arab tribes living along this Red Sea, but he does not mention where. Does not mention Mecca. And this would have, if Mecca did exist and people were making a pilgrimage there, then this would have been of great interest to the Greeks. Agatharchides would have been interested in something like this because, again, you have a polytheistic religion wanting to maybe incorporate the surrounding religions or maybe impose their own religion upon the surrounding religions. You had all of these things going on. And look what he also describes the land as. Uninhabitable. He describes the land as being uninhabitable. Now, this is a consistent description of the region of Mecca. You cannot live there. Why can't you live there? Because there's no water. So when we look at a map of detailing what Agatharchides talks about.
Stop. There's the Zamzam well. Everybody knows there's the Zamzam well.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Not only that, but I can explain all this. You see, the Jews covered this all up. It's quite simple. They prevented everyone from going on Hajj. They covered it up. They lied. This Ptolemy guy, obviously, let me look at the name, obviously Jewish. Yeah. Clearly.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually kind of scary. That's actually really scary because there are people who would actually believe that, to be honest.
Yes, I've heard it before.
Yeah, I've heard it too.
That what the Jews covered up the Zamzam? What is that?
I've heard stuff like this on social media. It's hilarious.
Yeah. If you guys ever get a chance, and what I'll do is I'll try to link some of the videos that Jay does in his class, the 504 class, as far as the origins, and he talks about the Zamzam well and how it does not produce even a fraction of the water that would be necessary to support any sizable city or civilization whatsoever. And that the Zamzam water that they get today is actually made, it's, what do you call it? Desalination plants. I'll call these desalination plants. I'm serious.
Yep. It's piped in.
Down in Jeddah that were
So it's piped in.
Right.
So the Zamzam is piped in. That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, it's not Zamzam water. It's scam water.
Well, that's exactly what it is if it's piped in.
It is. Oh, yeah. Well, in order to get enough water to Mecca, I mean, folks, Mecca today is this, huge, well, it's not a huge city, but it is a city out in the middle of nowhere that has no resources, natural resources to support it. All the natural resources, to include water, have to be pumped in. And
we have a city like that here in the United States, and it was only created because we dammed a certain river, and we have a dam that's well known that provides for that. It's the Hoover Dam.
Yeah. What was that comment that was made earlier? Here it is. Cross-examining said this. Mecca.
Yeah.
What happens in Mecca stayed in Mecca. That's what nobody heard about.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you,
Larry. I think it's an interesting proposition that you brought up, though, because it's like this idea that because they have always every day they have immigrants coming, like pilgrims who are coming every single day. The Kaaba always has pilgrims all the time, and there's always a need for the Zamzam water, right? So like that is an interesting question, because like for a lot of think Muslim adherents, they would say, well, this water magically keeps reproducing, but like is that actually the case? Like that, I think that would be a very hard thing for a Muslim to hear that the Zamzam water may not actually be coming from this well that was said to have come from Hagar or Hajar and Ismail, or Ishmael. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about.
Al-Fadi, if you listen to his channel, he's mentioned this, how the water had this special taste to it. And you were, it's almost like you're drawn to it. Here's an example. Okay, so a number of years ago, about 5-6 years ago, my wife and I went to Israel, and I got to swim in the Sea of Galilee. And to do that, knowing the history around it, what happened there, Jesus Christ walked on that water. It has a special, I don't know, a special smell to it, but it's exacerbated by the sensitivities of my faith. So I could see where you would have today, if people are thinking, well, I'm getting water from the Zamzam, and they sell it in little jars, water from the Zamzam well, take it. They would say, well, oh my gosh, this is from the Zamzam well. This is where, Hagar, she was thrown out and she gets this, she has this well up here. So all of that history from the Quran would have that psychologically, they're going to think that it's special. So they're going to say that it has this special taste to it. So I could see.
What you were tasting in the Sea of Galilee was diesel oil from the engines. I'm just saying. Yeah, that was that special.
It probably was. But
too.
But you know what's also interesting? Here's what's also interesting. The Sea of Galilee is not very big at all. They call it a sea because there's no water in the region to begin with. So, there's a bunch of water right here. Well, comparatively speaking, okay, yeah, there's a lot of water there. But it's nothing but a big lake. It's a sizable lake, but it's not a sea. And it's surrounded by mountains on all sides. But what's interesting is that there's one section of it on the west side where it's not surrounded. There is a corridor coming down off of the Mediterranean Sea where the wind can blow. So when the wind starts blowing strongly off of the Mediterranean into what is Israel, it's channeled through that corridor, and it causes these waves. Where we were out there one night, the first night we were there, we're down on the beach, and it's like glass. The whole sea is like glass. The next night, that wind kicked in, and we're talking 2 and 3 foot swells coming in. So when they start talking about storms picking up, and we hear about Christ calming the storm, that's just special. Anyway. Again, there's another confirmation or affirmation of how those storms could be brutal on the Sea of Galilee. Why? Because the Sea of Galilee actually exists, number one. But number two, it describes a physical phenomena that happens. Why? Because of the geography surrounding it. Okay. Anybody have anything else they want to add to there? Karen put something here that's kind of interesting. He said they add a bit of sugar to the Zamzam water before being piped into the well. I don't know if that's true. Al-Fadi lived there, so he would know better than any of us. That's kind of an interesting fact. Make it taste sweeter than the water around there. Okay, so let's go back to the slideshow. Okay, so when we look at Agatharchid's map, this is the imposition of the people of Talmud. Notice we got people of Talmud. Whoops, what did we do here? People of Talmud are included. The Nabateans are included. Petra is included. Here's the Gulf of Aqaba. Here's the Red Sea. They called the Arabian Sea at the time. They name a couple cities along the way over on the east coast of, or the eastern part of Arabia, also down in Yemen and Oman. But no, nothing about Mecca. But Talmud, the region of Talmud is mentioned in the Quran, but nothing about Mecca here. I wonder why that is. And here's how he measured it. So you have the measurements of it and how it simply doesn't exist. Okay, Diodorus. Now Diodorus is kind of important because this is another guy that Muslims will often, or Islamic apologists anyway, that will offer up as an example of referencing the Kaaba in Mecca. Here a guy, he writes in the 1st century BC, writes a whole volume set, 40 volume set on the history of the world. And he wrote about a temple that all Arabs came to honor and worship. But the problem is that the temple exists up here in the region of the Ban Zomenes, and this is up around the region of the Gulf of Aqaba, meaning it's up around the city of Petra. And so when we start looking at affirmation or confirmation of what some of the findings Dan Gibson has come up with, this confirms that, because you have all kinds of people trading with caravans and also making a pilgrimage to there. And there's also thought that Muhammad worshipped at a temple during the invasion of Tabuk, which would have been up in that region. And this location of again is confirmed by Agatharchides. And so when we look at it being confirmed also, you have a Byzantine ambassador, Nonassus, in 530, confirming this location. And this is up around the region of the Gulf of Aqaba. It has nothing to do with the region down in Mecca. Now, if you look where Mecca is, folks, Mecca is supposed to be right here. Gulf of Aqaba is clear up here. Big difference, big problem. Okay. Oh, actually, let's go to the next one. So here you have Mecca. This is where the Gulf of Aqaba is. Here's Petra. So you can see the distance is way off. There's no way that could have been the same thing. Okay, Artemidorus. Again, here you have another Greek geographer writing around 103 BC. He starts including information from the previous geographers and his own personal observations. And he starts describing strips of land along the Red Sea, along with their populations, along with describing what the civilizations and the types of people that lived in those cities were. And he mentions all kinds of uninhabitable islands along the coast, but he makes it perfectly clear. So even a Kafir understands that this place was uninhabitable in 103 BC. It's uninhabitable in a region that is supposed to have supported the oldest city, supposedly, of that area, Mecca, which was built or had the Kaaba built in it by Abraham and Ishmael, 2000 BC. But he says the region's uninhabitable. Who's telling the truth? Now, this next guy is absolutely, go ahead, who's talking? Ed, was that you?
I was just laughing. I'm sorry. It's just, it's good. I'm glad you're going at this the way you are. Thank you.
Yeah, because when you start going through all of the ancient geographers, and you have this one allusion from Ptolemy in the 2nd century, one time it's mentioned, and then you go through all of the previous cartographers and geographers of the time, and nobody mentions it. It really shines a light on the insignificance of this passing allusion to it. Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, this guy Strabo. Strabo is a 1st century cartographer, geographer, and he's Roman. And here's the thing that we need to understand: he accompanies Gallus. Now, Gallus is sent to conquer Yemen, and the Romans could control the spice trade. So when you have Strabo, I think I left out the A. It's not STRBO. I left out the A. What a moron. Anyway, when he goes with Gallus, he accompanies Gallus, and he is going to document every single square inch that army goes through. And the reason why this is a military expedition, and it's necessary to control all of the towns and the villages that are along the coast. So if you're going to control those towns and villages, you have to know where they are. You have to know what their resources, what type of resources that they have. You have to know what type of geography lies within that city and surrounding that city, whether it's worth the time to send maybe a supply caravan down to a city to get supplies for your army. It is important to know these things. Strabo would have recorded it. And so he also talks about the region from the Red Sea to about 100 miles inland of Arabia. Mecca sits about 40, 50 miles inland from the Red Sea. So Mecca most certainly would have been mentioned by Strabo in the 1st century if it had existed. He lists 3 stations that were built by the Nabateans as part of this route. And like I said, if they needed supplies, he would not have missed a village. He was going to meticulously document along this military expedition with a known historical expedition. He was going to document the entire region, 100 miles in. And the thing with Gallus is they failed. The Roman army failed in this, as a matter of fact. And the reason why is that the army suffered from starvation and privation of water. They didn't have enough water. So when they're searching, of course,
so didn't they just prove that it's uninhabitable by failing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's uninhabitable. You can't live out here. And if they were going to try to find some other village that did exist, maybe on an oasis or something, they are definitely going to interrogate the people within the villages themselves and say, hey, what else is out there? What is to the west? What is to the east? What is to the south? Tell us. And villagers, of course, are, if the Roman army comes marching into your town, you're not going to ignore them. And they're going to get that information out of you one way or another. And so they most definitely would have mentioned the existence of a city, especially from antiquity, 4,000-year-old city, or 2,000-year-old city at this time anyway. They would have definitely mentioned it, but they didn't. Why? Because it didn't exist. Go ahead.
Kaffir, listen to me. Clearly, Allah was protecting Mecca from the Roman armies. He made it invisible to them. Clearly. See that? Problem solved.
I'm sorry. That's a good laugh.
Problem solved.
No. You could never mind. You could probably write articles for Islamic awareness. That I didn't even look, but that might be true for them. Dio Cassius also mentions the privation of the expedition. He talks about how what a failure it was and why it failed. The reason why it failed is because they could not. They literally starved to death and ran out of water. That's why the expedition failed. It wasn't because they were defeated militarily. It's because they couldn't sustain the army that far south on the Arabian Peninsula. So if there was something out there, they most definitely have mentioned. And here again, Strabo, there I spelled it right there. What do you know? And he also mentions in his writings the works from the previous geographers and cartographers. So not only does he include his the writings from previous geographers and cartographers. He's using his own firsthand knowledge and observations and putting them into his work. This is a critically important work to cite. Why? Because it's right around the time that Muslims want to start saying that, well, Ptolemy said that Macoraba existed. And notice, he mentions other known villages in and around Mecca that exist today. So if he's mentioning these other villages, and we know that they exist today, why doesn't he mention Mecca? Why doesn't he say anything about Mecca? Well, we all know the answer to that. He doesn't mention Mecca because Mecca did not exist.
Uninhabitable.
Uninhabitable, exactly. And this is the route that they took and didn't make it back. So as they go by where Mecca is supposedly to have existed, nope, nobody's saying it, never heard of it. Keep on marching. Okay, now here you have a work. This is a book, and we're really not sure who wrote it, but this is supposed to be one of the most reliable historical records of the trade routes and regions of Arabia. It was written in the 1st century, as I said, by an unnamed author. But the reason why it's, you say, oh, well, the author's unnamed. Okay, this is true, but it's reliable based on observations that were made later, demonstrating the veracity of what is being written in the book. They believe that the guy that wrote it lived in Luce Come, which is further north, just south of where the Nabateans lived, but much further north from Medina and not Jeddah, Yambo. It's even further north of Yambo. And the reason why is when he describes Luce Come, it's very detailed of that location. He appears to be Greek, a merchant that traveled all throughout that region as far as India. And he was extremely, this is important, he's extremely familiar with that entire track along the west coast of Arabia. And the accuracy of this book, as I said earlier, is corroborated by all kinds of geographical and historical evidences that were produced later on. And he mentions all kinds of cities that were hundreds of miles from the Red Sea shore. Notice, all kinds of cities, not along the Red Sea, but 100 miles inland. He's mentioning these cities. He had a very intimate knowledge of the land that existed at that time. And he mentioned cities that were very, small hamlets, small villages that were of little importance. He talks about the tribes, the names of their king. He describes in detail the region surrounding Mecca. And despite providing the most detailed description that existed for 2,000 years, he doesn't mention it. Notice, he does not mention it. Someone who provides the most detailed description that was later corroborated of the region, he has nothing to say, never mentions Mecca just once. So when we look...
Hey, Eric, I'm just curious now that you've mentioned kings, even in Islamic sources, have you heard of leaders of Mecca before the existence? The names of the mayors or the kings of Mecca before the existence of Islamic literature?
No, there isn't any. The only thing that is mentioned is the people that lived in Mecca at the time of Muhammad, but they do not mention people.
But even in Islamic, what you're saying is even in Islamic literature, there's nothing that speaks of people living, of the leaders who, you would at least be able to name the leaders. In their own history, you would think they would be able to do it, but they can't.
Right? Yeah, because we know a lot of the leaders of the Egyptian dynasties, the Greek leaders, the Roman leaders, the Chinese leaders. Mm-hmm. We know all these things, but for some reason we don't know the leaders of these. Yeah, that's a good point. But again, like I said, this is a pagan place that did not have a lot of influence around the surrounding areas as far as its civilization is concerned or its culture is concerned. So that I don't know.
Well, what we do have is immediately, okay, let's assume the story of Muhammad is real. Let's assume that there really was a Mecca at the time of this, Muhammad person. So let's assume that's true. One thing we do know is that as soon as, well, Muhammad got out, he never returned to Mecca to make it his capital. As soon as he died, the leaders, okay, never made Mecca the capital, okay? The leaders, they all went to Damascus or other places in Iran.
And that's important too, what you just said, Red. That's very important.
Yeah,
what you just
they
said,
didn't
yeah.
stick around. I think Abu Bakr. No, actually, it was what was the Muslim that the Muslim leader that converted to Judaism after he died, and then later reverted. The one that Omar, was it Omar? No, Uthman. Yeah, he
buried him in a Jewish cemetery.
Yeah, so he converted to Judaism. The one that gave them their Quran, they murdered, and he was so disgraced they let his body rot for 3 days, and then buried him in a Jewish cemetery.
But there's another part to that. If you are a Muslim and you're reading Islamic history, you're not allowed to learn about how Uthman dies.
Oh,
you're
right.
not to discuss that. So
yeah.
I still recommend every Muslim to go learn about that, find out if what I'm telling you is true. I have a couple biographies of Uthman, and they say, shh, we can't talk about that.
Well, either way, it was clearly the Jews killed him. But anyway, but anyway, as soon as they get out of that area, they got out while the getting was good. They went to far better and greener pastures, as it were. So yeah, so this whole thing, and to be honest, I don't know. Are you going to get into actually what, if there was a Mecca at this time, what it would have been? It was simply there were many Meccas. Okay, what you would have when you had two warring desert tribes. I think Ptolemy points this out. Ptolemy. Anyway, you had two warring tribes. Okay, they would come to a wadi. Okay, a wash area. Okay, and they would build a Kaaba. They would just take unhewn stones, put them together, make a meeting house where they would meet and they would hash things out. And for some reason, no, seriously, that's what it was. And they're all over there. They're all over.
I thought that was what they were building around meteorite places.
Well, no, they're all over the place, all over Arabia. They can find them. Okay, where they just have these, the remnants of these Kaabas.
Are you actually telling us that they've done archaeological digs in Arabia?
They've done somewhat, but no, you can go to Google satellite maps, the good one, not the one on the internet, but you can get the subscription, and you can go and drill down, and if you want to spend your time doing it, yeah, you can find them. But anyway, bottom line is this place was nothing special. As a matter of fact, I honestly think that they were originally in Medina and not in Mecca, and they made the whole thing up about this magical, mystical place called Mecca. And yeah, anyway, that's my 2 cents. Who knows?
I think you have a question you have to answer there. Eric, you have to answer that last question there.
Which was what? Did
Jews kill Uthman? Really? I always believed that those killers were
Muslims. No. Jews didn't. No. They Muslims accused Uthman of helping the Jew. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but no, he was killed by Muslims.
Ali is thought to have killed Uthman. Right. And one of the reasons why they don't want you to discuss this is because if Ali does do the killing, then you don't have 4 rightly guided caliphs.
Right. Yeah, because Ali would have proceeded immediately after Uthman. You have
all right. I'll tell you a brief story.
Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman.
We gotta be careful with the sarcasm. We got people asking questions.
Right. I'll give you the brief breakdown of what happened. So Uthman was Umayyan. Okay, Umayyan. Okay, he's actually the last of Umayyad Caliphate. But anyway, he was promoting his family. I guess he had a son that was a total drunk. A known drunk, and he had to have him flogged and stuff. But he was doing this incestuous promoting and giving the spoils of the jihad to his family members. So they were not too happy on that. So you had 3 Muslim armies right out from different various parts, from Egypt, from Damascus, and Basra, okay, to confront Uthman. At first they put the whole city under siege for a little while, but then everybody's like, no, you don't want to do that. And then they made a peace treaty. They said, look, just go back to your to your garrisons, go back to your governors, and everything will work out. We'll correct this. Well, then supposedly after they wrote out, they found a letter that Uthman had put into the governors to say to kill these men on sight. They are traitors. So these dudes are like pissed because he reneged. So he went back. So they rode back, and then they surrounded his house. Okay. And at first it was, kind of like, yeah, we're just surrounding your house, like a kind of a protest, or mostly peaceful protest. And Ali actually Ali is supposed to be the negotiator. He's giving him the food and stuff like that, blah blah, and say, brothers, just go home. They're like, we tried that, and he said we're gonna get killed. So they're not having any of it. Well, all of a sudden, there's a non-obligatory Hajj that's going to happen. You don't have to go on this Hajj. Not to mention, all the people in Medina, they had already been on the Hajj multiple times, so they really didn't need to go. So basically, the whole town leaves and goes on Hajj. And Uthman was supposed to lead the Hajj, but he ain't going nowhere. So he told Ali to go lead the Hajj, and Ali's like, no, I don't want to leave. He was like, no, go ahead, brother, I'll be fine. So basically, the whole town of Medina left and left Uthman alone with these killers, okay, with these people that are surrounding his house. Uthman is not a bright man at this point, if this part of the true story is true. You see what I'm saying? They're trying to make Ali look into, he was the peacemaker, he didn't want to leave, but Uthman, the caliph, orders him. If that's the case, then Uthman is stupid, okay? All right, because he's going to get killed. He should know this. Anyway, they leave town, the hit is in, and they go and they chop him up, and they kill him. And supposedly he was reading the Quran that he compiled at the time, blah blah blah, whatever. Anyway, they
that's the Quran. That's the Quran. I can't remember which one that has the blood.
Yeah, but it's not. It's not. Paul, what kind of? Oh, okay, Paul. You're
that's because I am. That is because of
We don't want to know.
I'm logged in. That's because of how I'm logged in.
Okay. Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, point being is this. Okay. So then all of a sudden the people come back because they heard that Uthman had been killed, and they're not burying the body. They let the body rot in this dude's house for 3 days. Now I've heard Muslims say, well, they thought he was going to be resurrected. No, whatever. Anyway, so finally there were multiple attempts to bury him under cover of darkness, but they got caught. And finally, Ali made the arrangement. He said, listen, we got to bury this dude because he's starting to stink and it's not good. So why don't we bury him in the Jewish cemetery, which they agreed to, and they buried him under cover of darkness. This is the disdain and hate they had for this man, okay? He was not some noble, rightly guided caliph. The whole town abandoned him. I mean, they finally had to bury him under a, what do you call it? Uthman ibn Affan. Yeah, anyway, they had to bury him under cover of darkness. They had to bury him in Jewish cemetery. Oh, and then, though, but he converted back to Islam. Everything's okay. Because then, 14 years later, when they invaded Medina, the Muslims did. Another Muslim faction invaded Medina. They went and they knocked down the dividing wall between the Jewish cemetery and the Muslim cemetery. So thereby, Uthman is now a Muslim again. See?
Hallelujah.
I'm just going to recommend everybody pick up this book, Uthman ibn Affan, and it's by Dr. Ali M. Salabi. I think you'll have it'll take some of the mystery out of what's being said.
Is it pretty much what I just said?
It's been a couple years since I've read it, so I'm not going to. I don't remember all the details. The question is, Karen Thompson. Karen Thompson, I think, is probably pretty accurate. Unfortunately, I don't think Uthman actually exists. I don't think Umar actually existed. I don't think Abu Bakr actually existed. That's my personal thoughts, because if Mecca didn't exist, these first 4 caliphs likely did not exist. So again, I recommend, this is Dr. Ali M. Salabi, Sallabi, Uthman ibn Affan, and in there he does tell people, shh, we can't discuss this. But if you want to know, this is what happened.
Either way, they hated that man, or they hated the mythical
They hated the myth.
Yes, and that is the humor of this, because when you look at this history, there is no question that it is violent amongst themselves, and we get told Islam means peace. If the first rightly guided caliphs killed each other off, how is Islam peace?
Now compare that to the disciples' disputes.
Well, okay. Abu Bakr was not killed. He died.
Yes.
He was sick. So, but
Yes.
the next three, they whacked according to their own history. So,
well even Muhammad got whacked by a Jewish woman.
Who did?
Muhammad got whacked.
Muhammad, yeah, with the Kaibar.
Yeah, he got poisoned.
Dude, they killed Muhammad's grandchildren. They killed Muhammad Ali. They killed Ali. They killed his kids. Those are Muhammad's grandchildren. Hell, after Muhammad died, this is why the Shia, they say by Fatima's rib. They all swear by Fatima's rib, because allegedly the story goes that Omar busted down the door because he was threatening to burn down Ali's house if he didn't swear allegiance to Abu Bakr, but busted down the door, knocked Fatima down on the ground, busting her rib, causing her to have a miscarriage, and she later died. And that's why they say, I swear by Fatima's rib. You ever hear him say that? It's kind of funny. But that's why they do that. So now they butchered his entire family. But now compare this, put this in contrast to disciples. Disciples disagreed with each other, and in some cases had legitimate grievances. Like who was the one that Paul said? Was it Mark? He went on his separate ways because he was too young and he was spending the money.
John Mark. John Mark.
John Mark was spending the money, so they're like, "You gotta go home, dude." They didn't kill him. You know what I mean?
Kill him, Barnabas. Kill that kid.
He had legitimate grievances. He was not handling the money. You know what I mean? But no, seriously, and John, when they had the conference in Jerusalem. Okay, I mean, they had legitimate grievances, but they didn't go out and do jihad at each other or fight and kill each other or beat each other up. You know, no, they're just like, okay, go in peace, brother. We're going to go our way, you go your way, but we're still Christians. We're still brothers. You know what I mean? We're still Jews.
Or we're supposed to do that. There's been a time in our Christian history where we haven't been so good at that. That much.
Later on.
Even today, we're not really.
Oh, exactly. I agree. But no, I'm talking at the source. The source is violent from the get-go, where ours later, because of various things, Christians behaving badly, and we fight and kill each other. Okay, it's brotherly love, but it wasn't that way. You know what I'm saying? So you got to look at the source. You know, one starts out this way, the other degrades that way. You see what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah.
Law of thermodynamics. So, that's a law.
What the second law of thermodynamics?
Yeah, everything tends
towards entropy. Yeah.
Right. Or if you start out,
I tell you that I taught science for 2 years. I did teach science for 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Anyway, continue on. Sorry to interrupt.
I was a good science teacher too. Ain't that weird? And I had to teach the theory of evolution. Oh my goodness. I had a ball.
They wouldn't want me doing that.
Oh my! I had a ball doing that because when I start reading those billions of years ago in a land far away, and and the kids they loved it. And they caught on. They understood, how. Anyway, okay. So forget I said that. Let's move on. Okay, so let's go back to the periplus of the Eurythian Sea. And I saw that, where was that? Here it is. Ra Juarez mentioned this as that it's a Nabatean port city, and is absolutely right. It sits clear up here. So the guy that wrote this book lived clear up here, but he had an intimate knowledge of the entire coastline down to Yemen. And again, they're trying to establish trade, and he did establish trade with India. Okay, last one. Pliny the Elder, his survey. He lives in the 1st century at the time of Christ, actually lives at the time of Christ, and he writes it's a huge work called The Natural History in 77 AD, and it's probably the most important book where we have an understanding of Roman civilization itself. And he describes, look at this. He describes 92 tribes and nations in Arabia in this work. Does not mention any of the tribes which Islamic tradition claims to have lived in Mecca. So he describes 92 separate tribes, but nothing close to Mecca. He describes 69 cities and villages within Arabia, but not Mecca. Remember, Mecca, folks, this is the point you need to understand. Mecca is supposed to be the oldest city in Arabia. It was supposed to, you had a Kaaba built, it existed at the time of Abraham, and Abraham and his son Ishmael built the Kaaba, 2000 BC. So this city has to have existed for 2,000 years prior to Pliny being born. It has to be mentioned somewhere, if it did exist, if the Islamic narrative is true, if the Quran is true. He mentions all these other cities, along with all those other cartographers and geographers that we mentioned before. Every single one of them, every single one, misses Mecca. And the reason why this is significant, because it covers all the regions in Arabia at that time. And here's the thing, look how he was so detailed that he mentioned tribes that occupied the desert of Arabia, but does not mention any tribe around Mecca. So he's mentioning the tribes that occupy that entire region, does not mention any of the tribes that would have been in Mecca. And he does not mention Mecca, despite mentioning all the other significant locations. So when we look at Pliny the Elder, not confused with Pliny the Younger, his work is extremely important to understand that time period. So I know, here we go. Here's the caboose. Conclusion. Ptolemy did not mention Mecca. He places Macoraba, he doesn't say Mecca, it says Macoraba, east of Medina. He places it in the wrong area using his own latitudinal and longitudinal lines, the meridian placement of a area on a globe. He places it east of Medina, not west. When we look at the most trusted geographers at that time, the authoritative geographers at that time, for centuries that predate Islam, do not mention Mecca or to allude to it in any of their writings at all. When we look at their why, the motivations for their writings, what they did with their writings, what they were supposed to do, conduct warfare, feed armies, establish trade routes, establish rule over other nations, somebody would have mentioned it. Somebody would have brought it up if it was supposed to be that significant, if it was supposed to be from antiquity. But it wasn't. Not mentioned by anybody. And there's no, and this is the key thing to understand, all civilizations, ancient, have some sort of archaeological evidence supporting their existence. There's nothing there. And when I say nothing in Mecca, there is nothing there. All of the evidence from Mecca appears to be obviously redacted back onto what we call the standard Islamic narrative, which is derived from hadiths that were collected and written down 2.5 centuries after the death of Muhammad. So there we go.
I think there's more to add, and you've done this in the other shows. If you actually read the Quran and you read the hadiths and their descriptions of Mecca and its location, the things that are around Mecca, you're not going to find olive trees in this location. You're not going to find, you're not. There's just too much you're not going to find there. So
right, because Dan Gibson brings that up in his book Quranic Geography. It mentions that Mecca has olive trees. Mecca doesn't have olive trees. I would, this is why when we start looking at a modern Mecca today, let me see if I can bring up a picture of a modern Mecca today. When you look at a modern Mecca today, you are not going to see these olive trees or any remnants of olive trees. And the reason why you're not going to see them is because they cemented over the entire city. Let's do this. Mecca today. Mecca today.
Okay, the environment will not allow these kind of things to live because of the word uninhabitable. The only reason people can live there today is because they flush in water. They pipe it in.
Right, from desalinization plants, right? Exactly, absolutely right. Here's a picture of Mecca today. Let me bring this back up over here. Let me bring it. Where did it go? There we go, right there. Bada bing, bada boom. Get your act together. There's Mecca today. No, it's not. Where's that big
That's
clock
the Kaaba.
tower? That's the Kaaba here. Okay, let me find another picture. Give me a second here. I'll find something else that matches that, because if you look at, here we go. Okay. Here's Mecca today. Here's the Kaaba right here, this little dot right here in the middle. And you notice how they built all around the Kaaba. Now, the Kaaba is supposed to be where Abraham and Isaac, they're supposedly built that. And so if the Kaaba existed, the Kaaba would be kind of the centerpiece or the center point of a town. So the town would have existed around that Kaaba. And look at the distance that they go out, where they built these high rises, and they continue to build these high rises. It extends out, I don't know how far that is. That's got to be at least a quarter mile, maybe greater. And by doing so, what you're doing is in order to build those high rises, of course, you have to have a deep foundation for those things. So you have to dig down, and while digging down, you would have expected to have encountered some sort of why is that blurry? You would
find some kind of archaeological proof that there was something there beforehand, and they're
right.
not sharing anything.
That's the point. What they've done is they've essentially cemented over their lie, knowing that they don't have any archaeological evidence that supports the existence of Mecca in the 7th century. So what do? They cement over the entire thing, the entire region around it, and then just say, well, look, we're not going to go digging it. And I can hear the mantra already. Well, we know the Quran is true. Well, how do you know the Quran is true? Because it says it is. So therefore, we don't have to have any other proof corroborating the veracity of that book, where they'll turn around and they say, okay, well, the Bible, if you look at the stories within the Bible, we go in and like I can mention, I showed you in the slideshow earlier, you have clear over in Iraq, you have the existence of Babylon, the ancient city of Babylon, where Daniel and the Jews were carried off to. You have the existence of Sennacherib, who appears in 2 Kings, where he comes in and he's lays siege. So you have all of these figures authenticated through archaeology.
Even Hammurabi is mentioned in the Bible. This is he's mentioned in Genesis during Abraham's time. So you stop and you think, the Bible is so full of historical events, historical people. It's like you're reading living history when you're reading.
Yeah, the Quran can't even get close to the historicity of the Bible. It's incredible.
You got to have details that have history, and there's no details in that.
And that's the problem. That's exactly right, Paul. That's the problem right there. It is. You can tell that because of the vagueness and ambiguity of descriptions of places, that this has been redacted back into. This is not original source material.
So, Eric, as a person who did investigations in the military, I want to ask you, when you have a witness before you and they giving no details, what do we call that kind of person? Are they conning you if they're not giving details?
Right, and that's
it's a con job.
Right, that's how you determine the veracity of somebody's testimony, is by the amount of details that they provide. If they're in fact an eyewitness. If they're not an eyewitness, then it starts to become very vague and ambiguous in what their description. For example, an eyewitness be able to describe not only what happened, but also the color of the clothes that people were wearing. If there was automobiles, maybe some distinct smells or sounds that were occurring at the time. So these are the things that you try to clue into when determining if somebody's testimony is true or not. And this is exactly what we don't find in the Quran. We don't find these details, and when we do find them, they're out of place.
And it's what's interesting is part of looking at details is when you actually expect some details to be wrong if you're hearing two different sides. Again, the Quran's only written supposedly from one person's point of view, and you won't get those contradicting takes. You would think you wouldn't, but the Quran has so many contradictions that, and again, it's all written from the same guy's point of view, but he can't remember what he wrote earlier, which is, again, if you got a con man, he can't remember what he said earlier. That's why he says something different later.
Right. That's very problematic. If you cannot keep your story straight. And with the Bible, you think of the Bible, it's written on 3 different continents and was it 3-4 different languages by over 40 authors over a time period of at least 1,500 years. And the continuity of it and the harmonic theme of it is the same. And then you got the Quran. I don't know. Just no compassion. No comparison. Wait a second. Whoa, Karen says, I believe the cement is to stop the pilgrims from disturbing the 300 prophets. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, here's another picture.
Supposedly, when they because they also did Medina too. They remodified Medina, and that's where everybody's buried. Supposedly, they put a public toilet over like I forgot whose grave. Maybe it was Umar's grave. I don't know, but one of their
Abu Sufyan.
Yeah,
I believe it's Abu Sufyan. I'm willing to be wrong about that, but if I remember hearing this story.
I mean, it's just amazing. But no, I do want to comment really quickly here. You silly kafirs regarding the palm trees and stuff like that are not there in Mecca.
Olive trees,
yeah. Well, here's a simple explanation. Okay, first of all, the olive trees were all there until the Jews cut them all down. Okay.
Oh wait, who has the history of cutting down olive trees?
Wait a minute.
Who did that? Who has that history?
You mean Jews actually set foot in Mecca? I mean, really?
Yes, they snuck in. They were undercover Jews. And they went in.
Do you know what this means? It means Mecca's been tainted.
Oh no! See, Allah didn't punish them, so He converted them to Islam. So, yeah, it's okay now.
I'm still trying to find a picture of how massive this complex is around.
Just go to Google Maps, dude. Go to Google Maps, put in Mecca, dude. You'll see
the complex is around the Kaaba. Would you like to see a picture of it?
Well, I have it on Google Pictures, Google Images.
Oh, here, let me show you.
Okay. It's literally a shopping mall.
Well, I mean, even the hills of Safa and Marwa, they've had like
which are not
it's air conditioned.
Like
it's two different, the two different levels. It's air conditioned, and I get it. You get old people going over there today. You don't people dropping dead, but
they're not hills though. That's nothing. Not hills. They're just piles of rocks, dude.
Well, that they say that they're mountains.
All right.
Well, what do you get when you throw? You're supposed to throw rocks at things. You get piles of rocks.
What do you got there? What is this at? There you go. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so yeah, look how small the Kaaba is compared to the surrounding buildings. Now, these buildings are being built. Let's make sure we understand this. They're being built for people who are making Hajj to Mecca. They're there, and because before they were just putting them a bunch of tents outside the city, and with the living conditions, are squalid. And if you have the Hajj is during that year is during the middle of August, for crying out loud, people are going to sweat to death. So I could see wanting to bring some type of order to this and build these buildings. But while building the buildings, folks, you're going to find artifacts. If this city is in fact 2,000 years old, as I was showing you those artifacts from Greece prior to the 2000 Olympics, they did all kinds of digging around the city to build the new facilities for the Olympics. They were redoing the subway system, and they found all kinds of artifacts. Why? Because of the antiquity of the city of Athens. If Mecca's the same way, where is it?
The one thing that I did want to do is, while you had that picture up, I wanted to read the first five verses of Revelation 17 and see if you guys can picture this. All right.
Okay. Oh no, Ed, I'm not going to let you do this until you have a slideshow ready.
Okay.
I'm kidding. We've talked about. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." So he carried me away into the spirit into the wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead, on her forehead, a name was written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. So you can definitely see around the Kaaba, you can see the pearls, right? And you can see all the colors. You can see the horns and everything.
Okay, how many horns, Ed?
Well,
I counted them. You said 7. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So count the number of those green towers.
Those are I forget the number of the what
count
those
them.
are called.
The visible ones. How many got there?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. But if you look
I've got close to 10 of those, but that's...
Yeah. But if you look at the clock tower, you'll see one side of it. You see right up here where this marquee is, just right under the clock. That's the names of blasphemy, if you ask me, that are flashing across on that marquee.
And what does that marquee say? Do you know?
Well, it's the Shahada, I know for sure, which would be, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, right?
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
And then, of course, right up here at the top above the clock tower is the Bismillah, right? Right up there. And then, you have all your gold, and, just looking around, all the colors that I named off are here. It's all right here. Here's your gold. There's your scarlet, pearls. I mean, just everything. It's all here. I can't think of another place that you could pull up that would fit the description. Rome, yeah, right. You just showed the Colosseum, and I want you to. This is what I think John saw. This is what I think John saw in his vision. It's that.
All right. Well, you're gonna we're going to have to do this. I mean, yeah. You're going. Yeah.
I know, man, dude. I've been so covered up with work. I'm finally going to get a little bit of a break. They've been making me do all kinds of
quit
tests and stuff.
Retire.
Dude, I've been having to get all kinds of certifications and everything, so I'm getting there.
All right.
Anyway, so but getting back to this thing, the whole thing, all those buildings around there, they're air conditioned, they're high end shopping malls. When they do the sacrifice, remember they're supposed to sacrifice. They phone it in. They actually make a phone call to have these butcher shops already set up, these modern meat industrial plants where they put it in order for sheep and camel, whatever they're killing. And they slaughter it, and then they stamp the beef in Mecca and they ship it off, to sell it to all places of the world.
Oh,
so it's a money making machine. Is what it is. It's just ridiculous, dude. Anyway,
and there is 2 movies out now that a buddy of mine has made that I've kind of helped him on. It's called The Art of Imposture, and you can find it at the artofimposterfilm.com, and you're going to see a lot. He has incorporated just an incredible amount of the Bible into these films.
They're narrated by who?
By Osama Dakdak.
Okay. Yeah, and I've seen both of those, the edited versions and some of the, I can't really watch the unedited. That's just, I mean, it's just very graphic, but yeah, the Art of Imposture. Is it okay if I say the guy's name?
We call him NC Authority.
There you go.
Yeah, it's got his name up on the film. So
okay, all
but
right.
It's the link is artofimposterfilm.com.
Yeah, and be prepared. And it talks about a lot about the history of ISIS and what they did to Iraq, and it's hard to watch. Okay, so this is here. I did find another. Hold on, I did find another picture. Let me see if I can enlarge this at all. Mecca, bada bing, bada boom. Here we go. So here in the very center here, you have this itty bitty thing called the Kaaba, and you have here's the hills of Safa and Marwa, and right over here you have the Zamzam well, and here you have all the
piped in water that it's an imaginary well.
And that's
I don't know any wells that can call themselves wells that are actually piped in water.
And that
looks like an old photo. That looks like pre-2007.
This is, let's see, Mecca, Saudi Arabia satellite image. It does not give a date, but it gives the reason why I put it up there is I want to give you the scope in which they have dug down and built these structures on top of. And when you dig down, you would expect from a city that is supposed to be 2,000 years old or 4,000 years old now, you would expect to find artifacts. And they don't. They do not find any artifacts. And if you don't find any artifacts in that area, that means there's no history in that area. And the geographers, the cartographers from the 4th century BC up to the 2nd century BC are absolutely right in saying that the city the region was inhabitable and it did not exist.
Oh, I've got something else for you. They say that Mecca is at the center of the earth. No, it's not.
Not even close.
There's your longitude, latitude.
Oh, but it's lined up specifically with Mars, dude, or something like that. I remember I heard that before, that it's lined up specifically with Mars. I forgot what the argument was at. Anyway, share my screen, dude. See, yeah, that's an old one. This is from Google Maps, so this is most recent. Let me scroll down. You can see all these buildings here, all this stuff around. Well, right here, this stuff immediately around. Okay, the Kaaba. I'm sure you can't see my mouse. So this is all like a walkway, a shopping mall. All these other buildings are, again, this is all one big huge shopping mall. Over here you have these huge 5-star hotels. Over here, well, here's the clock tower right there. So yeah, but yeah, you have all these huge hotels that are surrounding it. This is like literally an Islamic playground for the rich and famous. Okay, and this is kind of the thing too. They're having complaints because the poor Muslims, they don't get to go anymore. Okay, they don't get to go to Hajj anymore because they're not letting them, because they have this coupon system or lottery system. They give so many. United States of America, for some reason, gets the most travel visas to go to Mecca than any other country in the world. But all these poor countries, they're getting less and less and less and less because they don't want those poor Muslims coming to their expensive shopping malls. You know what I mean?
You're gonna love me, guys, even more than what you already do. Look what I found. Are you ready?
Yes. Ready? Go ahead.
Sound like you're ready. Okay. Watch this. Come here. Here we go.
This is over the years.
Yep, from 2006 to 2021. Ooh, dig. Look at all that digging going on.
Wow.
I got to save this. This is from Google Earth time lapse. And they don't find it. All this building, all this digging, they don't find any artifacts. How is that possible? How is that even possible?
Yeah, you better save that really quick.
Yeah, I better download this Hamajama. This is incredible. This shows you how fast, and here I think this might have
the
been.
answer simply is it's uninhabitable. That's what you're seeing. A place that grows, that there is no fossil or archaeological evidence from there. It's just proving that the land was uninhabitable.
Yeah, there's nothing there. Good night. Wow. This is why I'm the host.
Why does the clock tower keep moving, dude? Or it keeps disappearing?
Well, because it's probably the
aerial shots.
Yeah, it's from the angle of the satellite. Yeah, that is. I'm gonna download that Hamajama. That's. I gotta.
You gotta see the ones from like the photographs from like the early 20th century.
Oh, I've seen it. Yeah, there's nothing there. You're absolutely right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is supposed to the holy thing of Islam for 1,400 years, and nobody decided to do what the modern rulers of Saudi Arabia did. You know, the great caliphs of the Ottoman Empire. You know, didn't, you know what I'm saying? Didn't build it up. You know.
Okay, you look at the question here. Where are all the prophets' graves? And they're right here. Let me point to them. Right here at this exit. They built an on-ramp right over the top of it, and they were all right there. No, you can't. Yeah, you can see that. Okay.
Wait, the prophets' graves they put an on-ramp over?
I don't know. I'm just kidding. Nobody. And that's the thing. You know, you would think that somebody would have found something, even. Was it Khadijah's house? They even cemented over her house. Supposedly her house. They cemented over that. Okay.
Oh, the fear.
Yes. Okay, we're gonna call it a night.
Islamophobia. You can't talk about what's not there.
Right. I want to end with one request that you would pray for the Queen. She's having a surgery this week. It's kind of a scary thing because we don't know if it's cancer or not. We're not 100% sure whether it is. We've known about this since November, and finally we've gotten to the doctor, and they're going to go in, and whatever it is, it's the size of a softball. I mean, it's absolutely.
How about we just do that right now, Eric? Just pray.
Okay, if you could do that for me, Paul, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Lord, we know you are the God who does impossible things. I've seen you heal many different things, cancer, so many little things. It's just impossible. And yet you do these things, Lord. You loved us first, Lord. You know Eric's wife. You know she loves you, Lord. We ask that you would use her this time, Lord, as a great miracle to show her doctors your love. In your name, Lord Jesus, amen.
Amen. All right.
Amen.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Just keep her in prayers. We're going to be the procedures at 1:00 on Tuesday. And, you know, we've gotten some pretty good reassurances from the oncologist and the doctors there. So it's just scary. And when somebody says cancer, you know, it's just like, well, wait a second, hold on a minute. You know, she doesn't have any history with it in her family. And when she sat down and told me about this, and that was a big hot mess. But finally, we're going to get some conclusion to this on Tuesday, and also that Christian extremists. Well, I'm not going to. Never mind. I'm going to leave it out of it because I don't know if it's She wanted.
I think a Christian extremist is someone who loves. So
Right, well,
you have
this,
people that are out. We'll call them fringe elements if they're outside the concept of what we would call orthodox, which is accepting doctrine. I mean, standardized doctrine.
I was just kind of being flippant with the term of the description of this individual because she was called a Christian extremist by a certain troll.
Don't mention.
I know I'm not. I'm leaving it out. I'm leaving it out. I'm leaving it out. But anyway, we'll know more about that condition here.
She's gonna be fine in Jesus' name. She's gonna be fine. I'm telling you right now. You're freaking out over nothing. Well, something, but it's nothing.
All right. Well, we've talked about this extensively, Rad, and I appreciate it.
Glad to be here today. Thank you for hosting again. I'm glad that you're back.
Yeah, so much. Yeah, I love doing. You guys, you can tell I love doing this. I love it a little bit too much, but I do enjoy it, and I do love doing it because it's a service to build up our faith. Knowing that, when we look at these other world views and these other systems out there, that there's nothing that compares to our faith and the proofs for it and why it's really not a faith, but it is a knowledge. And we can have that assurance, that blessed assurance that only Christ provides. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Don't forget to pay the cold clothes.
Advanced student and specialist, that the standard narrative has holes. That's what
I'm. That's all, folks.